All right. Today we have here Alex Batis. He's Warmly's head of engineering. He was a senior software engineer, then tech lead, and now he leads all of engineering and doing a fantastic job at that. And today we're going to be talking about building an all-star engineering team. Thank you for coming on with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. How's it going?
It's good. All right, so let's start off with a little bit about your background, your origin story, and what brought you here today in your current position.
Sure. So I'm Alex, head of engineering at Warmly. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to college and studied computer engineering, computer science. Originally, I was much more interested in computer hardware. So I thought that I was going to do some sort of embedded systems design. And then I started looking around and I got an internship in the healthcare field writing iOS apps. And that was really my first taste of sort of writing higher level software. So after that, I sort of ditched the hardware thing, worked in banking for a few years, and then about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, moved to Austin, Texas, and started my startup journey. So I've now been with 3 different startups in sort of 3 different completely separate spaces, sort of leading startup engineering teams that usually you can count on 1 or 2 hands.
And so, what's been some of the biggest challenges of navigating these different types of startups? Because it's quite a range here.
Yeah, I would say that the difference between working for a large financial institution or a large healthcare institution and working for like a startup that usually has maybe 10 to 20 people is a big difference, right? So, especially when working in banking, there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of overhead. And for example, when we worked at the bank, we could deploy to production once every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And if you like missed that window, you had to wait 2 weeks again to get your code into production. And there's tickets and permissions you need for everything. And then you come to the startup world and you might deploy to production a few times a week. And there's a lot of red tape that's cut, which is great, right? No one wants to deal with the bureaucratic nightmare, but it's a different mindset to get used to, is like shipping software multiple times a week, constantly deploying to production. And it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of like, I would say, when you're at the bowling alley and, you have the rails up, you start with the rails up and then the rails
Yeah.
go away. So like all of the safety measures go out the window, and it's sort of just, the floor and the gas pedal.
Yeah. You're praying basically. But what I always found really fascinating, Alex, is you made a huge impact at Warmly's engineering team in a very short amount of time. Maybe you could talk about where Warmly was in the engineering department, and then talk about like how we got to where we're at today. Because today it's cooking.
Yeah, we've definitely made a lot of improvements, and something that we're always doing is trying to like up level our team. But yeah, when you come on to a startup engineering team as a senior software engineer, you really should be providing value in your first week. It's something that we do
Mm-hmm.
with our engineers when we hire engineers. We want senior devs to be pushing their first feature, bug fix, really just their first contribution to production in their first week.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's good as a learning exercise, right? Because you can sit there and read through the code for a week, but you're not going to learn the same way as if you were to get your hands on the code and just start writing. So I think that that's like a really important thing in terms of coming in and making an impact, is time to first
Mm-hmm.
value, as we like to call it.
Right.
So as soon as
Yeah.
you're hired, just immediately starting to write code and taking ownership of some other features. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that was my goal when coming into this company or coming into my other startups. It was basically, how quick can I start influencing the code base or influencing the process or influencing the engineering culture. Um, and I think that one of the reasons that our engineering team has been so up leveled is we have a uh, quality of excellence that like everyone holds everyone to. And whenever we hire new engineers, we make sure that that person's going to be up leveling the engineering team.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of hiring, let's kind of get into it. What are some of the criteria you look for when hiring the next engineer?
Yeah, I think this will vary from company to company, but for our case, we decided that we're going to be hiring software generalists instead of software specialists. And we purposefully went for with the approach of hiring more senior engineers as opposed to like junior intermediate engineers, just so they can really start making that impact, that time to first value that we talked about. Um, I think that when you're trying to build an engineering team or hire, um, it's really hard to know how much of an impact that person's going to make. Um, and at some orgs, this is usually larger orgs, they'll ask you to inverse a binary tree, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
for us, if someone can inverse a binary tree or not, that's not going to tell me like if they're going to take ownership over a feature or a part
Mm-hmm.
of our code base or like really make a big impact. So you do some technical screening, but I would say that the technical screening is really to screen people out rather than screen people in. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
for some of those coding assignments that we do, it's like if you can't do this, then you're probably going to have a hard time doing a lot of the stuff that we do. But I think it's hard in maybe a few hour interview or a take home assignment to like truly understand someone's technical abilities. So I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it is going with your gut.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
I would say also like
Yeah.
experience wise, we talked about hiring senior engineers was like something that we did as a purposeful choice to avoid that sort of learning curve or training or mentoring, just to get quicker time to first value.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think, since I talked earlier about the differences between working for a huge institution and like a 10 to 20 person startup, we really like to see people who have startup experience. I think that
Yeah.
like I would rather have someone with like, an average resume that has good startup experience than someone has like a really sweet resume, but has only ever worked at, companies with hundreds of thousands of people, something like that.
Definitely. What's interesting is there's tons of people who have startup experience, tons of people who have a lot of experience, but you managed to filter through all the wheat for the chaff. And you had a very technical process. You have 45 minutes with each candidate after like the behavioral interviews, the vetting, the initial checks. And then after that, it was kind of a sure decision. I'm just curious like what the process was to arrive at some of these fantastic candidates, if you have one in mind.
Yeah. It's not a very scientific answer, but I think what you really have to trust your gut. I think that like something that we've said a lot here, at least I've said on the engineering team, usually like if it's not like a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Right.
You sort of know it when you see it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, with these interviews, you can't tell like is this person going to own a feature, or is this person going to be reliable? Is this person going to work really hard and do things right? I think there's another component of this trust. So
Mm-hmm.
like whether you're an engineering leader or an engineer, you basically have some sort of maybe subliminal confidence interval that when you're given a task or when someone else is given a task, like you think to yourself, like, what is my percent confidence interval that this thing will get done correctly, get done on time,
Mm-hmm.
get done, with minimal bugs, so, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, so I think what I do is I try to gather everything they tell me and say, how confident would I be after giving this person, a bit of time to ramp up of saying like, here's a feature. I need you to take it from 0 to 1 and run with it. And I need you to work with me. I need you to work with product. I need you to work with whoever to get this done. And
Mm-hmm.
if I think that that person's going to get it done correctly with no bugs and on time, then they're usually a pretty good candidate. One other thing is like there's probably a bit of luck involved too. I think
Mm-hmm.
we've been very lucky and very fortunate to have landed some of the engineers that we have because we just really do have an awesome engineering team here.
Yeah, definitely can attest to that. So it's interesting what you say here, going with your gut, because you yourself were what was an incredible were you were an incredible IC contributor when you first started at Warmly. And maybe it is birds of a feather flock together. You can spot your own like I know my kind, and therefore I know what it looks like. And so maybe there's an element of that. Can you talk a little bit about what it takes to be an amazing engineer in general?
Yeah. Well, going back to your point about like sort of knowing your kind or something like that, I think there is sort of whenever you riff with someone on a technical interview, I
Hmm.
find that my technical interviews seem to be more conversational than like drilling them on specifics of things. And if someone
Right.
can sort of go back and forth and riff with you on sort of the more nuanced topics on some of these things, like instead of if I'm quizzing someone on React, right? Instead of asking them to like make me a button that does X, I'll be like, what's your opinion on React hooks, or what's your opinion on context or Redux? And usually, like if they give me a very straightforward technical answer, it's not what I'm necessarily looking for. Uh, a good engineer can tell you like what's good, what's bad, what's nuanced. And I think in like software that everything has a trade-off. So like a candidate being able to articulate those trade-offs of like what the pros and cons of software are really good.
Mm-hmm. It's not
Um,
enough to just say, go ahead.
oh no, please.
Yeah, it's not enough to just say, oh, this is what Redux does. It's being very opinionated, like, oh, I like Redux a lot better than MobX for X, Y, and Z reason, and here's why. And then actually going into some sort of argument with you about it. Um, that feels like that's important because those types of people have to get to the underlying nitty gritty nuts and bolts of how the technology actually works to have that sort of opinion.
Right. And like there's no silver bullet in software. Like nothing is if someone said Redux is the best library ever, like I use exclusively that. There's no downfalls or pitfalls to using it. Then that's sort of a
Mm-hmm.
red flag that that
Right.
means that they may only have like surface level understanding
Mm-hmm.
of how to use it.
It sounds like we're going for deeper understanding. People who are wanting to investigate their techies at heart.
Yeah, you need someone that can go wide and that can go deep whenever you need them to. I think that's another thing that's sort of hard to assess during a technical interview. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in our jobs, if we're whipping up a feature or working on the product, some features just are easier than others, and you're able to knock them out, put up a PR, and get them out into production. Other ones often are far more nuanced and require you to like read through documentation or sift through libraries, read another developer's code. You're on GitHub issues that were like have been open for 4 years, something like that. So like I would say that's also a good indicator of like a good engineer is someone who can go really, really deep on a problem when they need to.
What kind of advice would you have for someone who's maybe not quite there at the senior level yet? And then what would you say they could do every single day to get there?
Yeah, I would say that like emulate the people that are like if you're in if you're on
Mm-hmm.
a team with senior engineers, like really study them. I think that one good thing about a good senior engineer is that they move very intentionally. There's not a lot of wasted energy. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you can think about it like an exercise, right? Like, or if you're running, the quickest path between 2 points is a line, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
junior engineer might get from point A to B like this.
Right. Right.
So I think that like doing things efficiently and like finding good mentors is good, but like observing other people's work, right? Like here we do a lot of code reviews, so the team reviews each other's code. I think for a more junior or intermediate beginning level engineer to like really look at the senior engineer's code whenever they are doing code reviews. I encourage like all software teams to have everyone
Mm-hmm.
reviewing everyone's code. And I'm sure that a junior engineer would take a look at the senior engineer's PR and be like, oh, I would have never thought to do it this way. Or like, look how
Right.
clever this is. And like really internalize those little tidbits.
Yeah. Expand the realm of what's possible. Like I never even thought to do that, and now it's part of your toolkit.
Right. I
So
think
what about?
that everyone you work with like uh, does things a little bit nuanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as you meet more engineers, more software developers, you take a little piece of them with you. So like it might be like a little cliche, but like you're sort of uh, a collection of all the people that like have shaped you as an engineer like throughout your career.
That's right. Another thing I found really interesting about working together actually is how fast you move. So you get a lot of stuff done very, very quickly. Maybe it's a mindset, but it feels to me that the more you do, the more experience you get, the more technologies that you can touch, and then the faster you can improve your level. Curious how you think
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, I think there's something to that. I think like the more times that you've done something, the easier and the faster that you can move. But I think it also comes from having a sense of urgency and a sense of motivation to
Mm-hmm.
get things done fast, get things done on time. Put in the extra work when you need to. Like I said, some stuff that you work on is going to be inherently easier than other things. But
Right.
being able to bear down and just like commit to getting things done,
Mm-hmm.
another thing that's hard to measure during a job interview when you're trying to build a team.
Right.
You're like, will this
The
person really
grit.
put towards the effort? Right.
Yeah.
So I think of like, in order to move fast, but also break as little as possible, it's like it's a mixture of having experience plus determination.
Yeah. That is extremely hard to gauge during the interview process. Um, So now that we talked about the ICs, you've recently transitioned over into leadership. How's that been?
Yeah, that's right. It's different. It's a different world.
Yeah.
But it's still some of the same. I think that like what I've seen at the startups that I've worked for, and it's for the most part not different here, is that when you're people manager at a company of our size, you still have to be an IC, or you still have to do
Hmm.
some amount of IC work. I think that like none of the startups that I've worked for have been large enough that the people manager doesn't have to get their hands dirty a little bit.
Right. It's a tough job, and it's got to be one of the hardest jobs out there because you have to code. You're responsible for pull requests on a weekly basis, and on top of that, you're responsible for the output of the engineering team, communicating up to management, being the bearer of bad news. Making sure your team is happy and protected, and also all the while making sure the product's good too, because that is also the engineer's team's responsibility. So, not an
Yeah,
easy job by any means. How do you handle all that?
for sure. Yeah, I think that that's like one of my biggest sort of responsibilities. How I see it is keeping the lights on, right?
Hmm.
And that could mean for the product or for the team, but it's like at the end of the day, like I think it's my responsibility to keep the lights on, and then after that, it's like to keep everyone happy, right? So like,
Right.
and when I say
Yeah.
everyone, I mean my team, but I also mean people outside of my team. So like, it's it's oftentimes these things are at odds, right? So keeping my team happy might be directly what's best for my team isn't always best for the company or best for this other team
Hmm.
or something else. And something that I try to do to keep the team happy is limiting their scope of things they have to do.
Hmm.
For example, like we try to keep our engineers really light on meetings. You
Hmm.
know this, but like I'm a big fan of low meetings.
Right.
um, I've been in more meetings now since I've taken more of a leadership and management role. Uh, but my engineers, I think, are most productive and most happy when they could have large uninterrupted portions of their day when they could be writing code. Um, as someone who writes code, like you know this too, like you sort of
Hmm.
get into a groove, right? And then, but if
Right.
you're interrupted with meetings and uh, 2 hours of consecutive heads down time to knock something out is not the same as having 4 30-minute windows like throughout your day,
Right.
because there's a ramp up and a ramp down time. So like being very conscious that their time is important and valuable, and whenever you can have it in a larger unsegmented
Hmm.
chunk, they'll be more efficient. I think another thing that we did was we set up a really good DX developer experience for our code
Hmm.
base and our app and our systems, and it's something that like really pays dividends. I think it's a
Hmm.
hard thing to have a business justification for, right? Because it's not really clear sometimes how doing this thing that will improve developer experience will affect your bottom line,
Hmm.
right? Because you're not going to say I'm going to push this out and it's going to lead to X dollars more revenue, or you know
Yeah.
X hours spent. So I think that like uh, having that DX is really underrated.
Let's talk about that topic. A lot of people watching here, especially the CEOs, the head of sales, they want to say like, features, features, features. I want features fast. Why are we not doing features? What is this scalability stuff? What is this developer experience stuff? Can we talk a little bit more about your perspective on the cost or why you think it's so important and what people in sales and CEOs or marketers or whoever else need to know about this?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's mostly like streamlining efficiency, right?
Hmm.
So if you have a poor developer experience, something that would take an hour might take three, something like that. And it's really just investing in your tech so that your people can work as productive as possible.
Hmm.
For example, like I've worked at a number of different companies and different code bases that when you're working on them, you have this concept of like what's called a hot reload. So when a developer changes some code, they save the file, and then the app refreshes with the newest code that's running. I've
Hmm.
seen this take anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute to
Hmm.
sometimes over a minute, right? Uh, so that's basically any time that a developer changes a file and saves a line of code, they have to wait for a minute in order to see that change propagate. So, like, what
Right.
do you do during that minute? Do you grab a coffee, get some water, like walk your
Yeah.
dog or whatever? Uh, what if you can get that time down to a half a second or a second, right? That
Hmm.
means that your engineer for every hour that you pay them, they might be waiting on the app to reload
Right.
for 30 of those minutes. Like, what if you can drive that number down as slow as possible? So for every hour that they work, they're only sitting around with idle hands for a few minutes.
It also affects morale too. The developer
Oh,
experience is not just for efficiency, but it's for churn risk and happiness of the engineer. I mean, it
uh,
percolates into other areas.
totally. And you're gonna, when you work on code that you're happier with, like that just works or has really nice features. For example, like our app is completely in TypeScript, and we have a lot of cogen and different tools to make sure that our code is always type safe. And that's the type of thing it's hard to quantify and put a number on exactly how much time or effort that
Mm-hmm.
saves. But like, you've been in our code base and you know that it's just like smooth like butter. It makes
Yep.
working with things more enjoyable, easier, and like more predictable as well.
This is code gen that Alex wrote on his spare time. This is what Alex does. He writes code generators that generates code so you don't have to write it. And yeah, it saves us a ton of time. This is the kind of guy that you want on your team. So for sure, very much appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what you do whenever you do something 1,000 times and you know how to code, you automate it. So like
Well said.
if I do this thing, if I've done this thing 10,000 times, I don't want to do it 10,001 times. I'm going to write a script and automate something to write my code for me.
Right. And let's come back to building an all-star team.
Right.
So, you're a rock star here. And how do you make sure everyone else is a rock star? Is there some sort of accountability mechanism? You talked about hiring. Is there something that you do, maybe a story that you can tell of this is how we leveled up collectively? We brought in A players, we made them A plus players, brought in B players, made them A plus players as well. Anything you talk about there?
Yeah, I think it should be, at least with a company of our size, I think it's usually very apparent if someone's making an impact or not. I would
Mm-hmm.
say that at least within the engineering team, I think outside of the engineering team, it's also apparent, but probably not with the same level of detail that I have into, how much impact someone's having. Um, I think that usually with a team of our size, if you have to question, is this person really impactful? Has this person
Mm-hmm.
up-leveled our team? Then
Mm-hmm.
like the answer might be no. Like I said, fortunately, we've done a really good job, and pretty much everyone that we brought on, we do check-ins and we clearly articulate what our goals for them are. We give them
Mm-hmm.
30, 60, 90-day plans. But it usually doesn't take 90 days to tell, like, is this person making an impact? Are they up leveling the team? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a good engineer who like really works well with your team and is efficient, this is usually becomes very clear. It's very self-evident.
And let's say they're not making the expected impact in the first 30 days or 90 days. What happens next?
Yeah, I think that it's a case by case basis, but you have to work with that person and understand, what's preventing you from being an A player, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what can I, as an engineering leader, optimize so that you can work better or be more efficient or be more productive. Um, Fortunately, that's not the case here. We really haven't had too much of
Yeah.
that. Everyone we've had has really made their impact very, very clear. But I think that you also like need to be willing to cut your losses early. Something that like we haven't had to do. But if someone isn't living up to the standard, the standard of excellence that you've set on the team,
Mm-hmm.
then you need to work with them to get them to that. But if both parties don't think that person is ready or capable or willing to live up to the rest of the team's standard, you might just have to cut your loss.
Yeah, this is a really important point. It's to everyone's benefit, to the team's benefit, that the level of excellence is maintained. It comes at the cost because, get into the details of it, you have to review their PRs. There's more time in from you. Other team members have to review theirs. They have to review. There's, like performance improvement. So it all adds up.
Right,
And
and
to the
and you
second
want to
time.
be an A player, right? You want to be on a team of A players, people who make you better, people who elevate you, right? You don't want to be
Yeah.
working alongside of people that like I either don't lift you up or, God
Mm-hmm.
forbid, people who bring you down. So like I think that it's a positive feedback loop. It's infectious, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
whenever you have A players on the team who are constantly driving up that standard of like of
Mm-hmm.
what it means to be an engineer at Warmly, It's just we feed off of each other's energy, we feed off of each other's ideas,
Right.
and
Yeah.
if you throw someone in there who drags it down, you really need to seriously consider if that person's like the right fit.
That's right. At that point, when everyone's an A player, it's no longer your boss telling that you're being held accountable for. You're holding each other accountable, every single person, because we all see what we code and what we write, and so we know when someone's slacking or someone's not doing good work, and it's apparent. It's all there in plain sight. So it's one of the things I've always been really impressed by is, your grit, your push for excellence. And now that you step into the engineering role, what would you say makes an amazing A+ engineering leader? Might still be early, but we'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, I think the thing that separates me from maybe some other leaders is that I'm willing and able to get my hands dirty. I know that
Mm-hmm.
but when one of my first mentors or engineering leaders that I worked with when I was working in banking, he was a guy that like came from a technical background, um, and had written code, was a developer, super sharp guy. And I remember like being on these calls with him and watching him take these calls.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some people, whenever you know the technical speak starts coming out, they they do the best they can to sort of keep up or understand what's going on, but they really have to go back to their tech lead or someone to like consult on like, hey, is this doable? Is this possible? But it was really
Mm-hmm.
interesting seeing him have that knowledge, not having to depend on it for someone else, but just having it firsthand. So like
Mm-hmm.
nothing would get past him on calls, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
he would have the ability to check anyone on what they said because he had the experience and the
Mm-hmm.
domain knowledge, the expertise to not only walk the
Mm-hmm.
walk but talk the talk. I think that's really
Right.
important. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what else? I think you alluded to this earlier, but standing up for your engineering team. So
Mm-hmm.
like there's a lot of voices all around the not our company, but every company saying that like this is something that I want or this is something that they want. You need to the developer or the engineering team needs to have an advocate, right?
Right.
So I think Alan and I, for anyone listening, exchange a lot of memes. We do a lot of programming
Yes.
memes,
The
and
Instagram memes, coding
right.
humor, hilarious.
So Alan made one. It's like that meme where there's the guy with all the armor, and he's has a big shield, and he's like sort of huddled over the other one, or the one where the military guy has his arms crossed, and all the
Yeah.
arrows are coming down while the guy's in bed, like sleeping at night. So like I think you need that guy, right? You need someone to be an advocate for the team.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like we recently were doing an exercise on um, refining our process for gathering bugs, right? For filing bug reports and whatnot. And before this process was pretty loose, it started to get out of hand in the fact that people would report bugs, but there was often no way to reproduce them, or sometimes it wasn't a bug. It was, it's the classic, not a bug, it's a feature, or it was
Mm.
intended behavior,
Love
something
that.
like that. So, anyways, what we
Right.
did is, like I had noticed this sort of blip in our process. So we made like a very structured form, and the form has like all of the information that an engineer will need to be able to really effectively go squash a bug. So like things like
Mm-hmm.
attaching screenshots, reproduction steps. Who is this happening for? So it makes it
Mm-hmm.
like really dead simple for someone on our engineering team to understand what's going on and then just go work on it. I think
Mm-hmm.
before it was much more open ended. People could take an hour trying to understand like what bug
Right.
am I trying to solve. So I think just like setting yourself or setting your team up for success is like really important. It's like an alley oop,
Right.
right? Like you want someone who's
Yeah.
going to like get you as close to the hoop as you can, so you can have a slam dunk.
Yeah, it sounds like just like in programming or in code, there's a bottleneck somewhere. Maybe it's the traffic, maybe it's this, the speed, whatever. In the system of people in engineering production, there's always a bottleneck as well. And this is one example of improving a process to unbottleneck a bottleneck and then maybe finding the next one. Definitely a key part of engineering leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be able to adapt your process, right? Like, you need to gather feedback from your team and really sort of democratize like your process. So, you'll never find here at Warmly the engineer saying like, we want to do something this way, and me saying like, no, this is the way it's done, right?
Right.
Like you need to be able to be adaptable and change, and it might not even be the right choice. You know, we've done a lot of things where we say we're going to change our process, we'll give it a try for a couple weeks, and if it's not
Mm-hmm.
working, we're going to go back to the old way or try a different way. So like
Right.
you don't want as an IC, you don't want your concerns to fall on deaf ears, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as the leader, you need to like hear what people are saying, gather their feedback, and
Right.
actually like commit to adapting or changing to keep everyone happy and efficient.
That's the key thing, is committing to action happening, listening to feedback, and something happening afterwards as well. Last question that I think everyone would be very interested to hear about is, engineering is one of those departments that it's the most nebulous. And so you have to constantly communicate to other departments, and it's easy to have friction with marketing. It's easy to have friction with sales, CS, the executive team. What are some of the things that you think other departments should know about how to work with engineers or the engineering department?
Yeah, I think that as far as it goes with working with engineering, I think that being a technical person can oftentimes you speak in engineer speak, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes there's something lost in translation. The engineer, they'll say like, "Hey, what about this feature?" And then the engineer goes off on a little rant that sounds like gibberish, and you're like, "All right,
Mm-hmm.
can you say that in English?" Right? So I would say like as engineers, we try to understand sort of the lingo of the business and understand other people's pain points. I would say try to understand, like whenever the engineer goes into the thing where they do the engineer talk, don't just sort of zone out and like wait till they're
Mm-hmm.
done. uh, you don't need to be an engineer to try to understand what they're trying to tell you. So like
Mm-hmm.
try to speak their language, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to like ask a dumb technical question.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing is like uh, keep in the back of your mind when working with engineers or the engineering team that just because it's something that you can articulate really easily doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be like something quick and easy for the engineering team to get done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's easy to look at a product and say like, oh, we'll just change this and put it over there and make it do this. It's
Right.
really easy to say sometimes, but like really there could be like thousands of lines of code that are behind that button. So when you click that button, it triggers off something really complex in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think oftentimes people think that just because they can articulate something easily, that like it can also be implemented very easily. And it's not often the case. Um, I think one more thing too is like understanding the margin of error sometimes that the engineering team has, especially when running at scale. It could be something like super innocuous that you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't 99 times like wouldn't really matter. And then if you run it over a data set with billions of things in it, that very small inefficiency will become very, very clear on
Mm-hmm.
the result. So like, especially when running software at scale, sometimes I think the margin for error is really, really low.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you're working with the engineering team, just keep things like that in mind.
So it sounds like a lot of empathy for the engineers. Maybe subscribing to coding comedy, and then you can feel a little bit more about what engineers are feeling on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's not an easy job, especially at a company like ours where we are small as a team, right? Like there's a million things that everyone wants and they all want them yesterday, but we only have so many hands, so many keyboards, and so many hours in the
Right.
day. It's not an easy job. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but we're like working super hard and honestly moving really fast.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I won't take up too much more of your time. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much for coming on today, and we'll catch everyone next time.
All right. Thanks for having me on.